Hi, I'm Zeynep Coşkun Koç, a research fellow at El Sharq Forum. Today we are in Istanbul for our conference towards a new security architecture for the MENA region. I have a senior fellow from Umran Studies and a former legal advisor to the Syrian National Council, Mr. Yasser Tabara. Welcome, Mr. Tabara.
Thank you.
It's really good to have you here and all of your expertise and all of the insights you're providing for our conference. So today we want to talk with you about the war crimes in Syria and what could be done internationally, and also we want to talk with you about the peace processes, Geneva and Astana. My first question is that there are a lot of clear war crimes in Syria, use of chemical weapons and inhumane means, and why nothing is happening in the international community.
So, because the world has a different geopolitical agenda, international powers have a different geopolitical agenda, simply. But I mean, just go back to your description of what's happening in Syria. The UN High Commissioner of Human Rights just a few days ago said that Syria has become a big torture chamber with tens of thousands of detainees as we speak right now, being tortured to death, being kept in detention until maybe starved to death. Just a few days ago, a densely populated or a densely attended mosque in Aleppo was bombed by it's yet to be determined, but I think its evidence goes towards that it was a coalition airstrike on a densely attended mosque where you have close to 60 civilians that lost their lives and hundreds that are injured. And so the level of criminality that is taking place right now in Syria is almost unprecedented, and it's something that the world has not seen since World War II. So it's very, very important to put things in context. Now, why all of this criminality has not been heeded or has not been paid enough attention to in terms of accountability and in terms of impunity? And I think it's because the whole process of an international criminal law has been basically hijacked by the political process. And when you have international powers such as Russia and such as the United States, who Russia has refused to sign the International Criminal Court Rome Statute agreement, and then you have the United States basically withdrawing from the signature of that agreement. Then you have the jurisdiction of the court itself, basically stemming from a Security Council referral, and then you have Russia and China constantly vetoing any referral on the Syria situation. And so you have an international criminal legal process that is basically being hijacked by the political ambitions of the superpowers in the region. Russia does not want to see its client, Bashar al-Assad and his regime, be prosecuted in an international legal forum. As Syrians, this issue of accountability and end of impunity of someone so criminal is front and center to everything that we advocate for. And in fact, if you want to go back to sort of the international instruments that governed the context of the Syrian crisis and the road to its solution, the Geneva I communique, it spoke of a process that should be fulfilled in order to reach some form of a political transition. One of these steps is the end of all hostilities on civilians, the establishment of for example, a transitional governing body, working on the constitution, working on elections, things of that nature. We haven't seen any of these things being fulfilled as international instruments because, again, an international superpower does not wish to see the process go in that direction.
And coming from there to the Geneva process and Astana processes, what is the thing that's completely blocking the system?
Well, the Russians have, in a way, hijacked the Geneva process by introducing the Astana talks. By doing that, what they wanted to do essentially is reconfigure what the world has agreed on in the Geneva communique. You know, these steps that we talked about, arriving at a sustainable political transition. And so what they wanted to do is they wanted to sort of hit the reset button and then tell whoever is around the table, this is how it's going to happen. Forget about the end of hostilities, forget about the confidence building measures. We're going to be talking about things like a unity government with a high potential of Bashar al-Assad and his regime remaining in power for some time to come. They brought in the Iranians to this process, where the Iranians were clearly as a big part of the problem as opposed to the solution. And so what they wanted to do is they wanted to introduce an alternative international mechanism to deal with what's going on in Syria on their own terms, not on the terms of the Europeans or on the terms of the friends of the Syrian people who have enveloped or who have commenced a process that quasi-supports the Syrian opposition.
And what should be the strategy at this point for the Syrian opposition? They retracted, they said they're not going to join Astana talks, and then recently they said they're going to join, and Geneva is going on. Recently again stopped, but so what should be the strategy for the Syrian opposition?
Well, considering the amount of leverage that the Syrian opposition has, which is not very at this point, there has been basically talks of maintaining minimum, threshold of certain principles before going into any negotiations. And so the opposition now is talking about ending hostilities towards civilians as a precondition. That's something that is very natural and very normal for any negotiating partner to say, before I go into any negotiation, I just want to make sure that the parties that are bombarding my population in areas that I can control are safe. And that, till this moment, is not the case. Till this moment, you have Russian airstrikes on Daraa, on Idlib. You have Syrian regime airstrikes on Aleppo and other parts. You have coalition airstrikes. So civilians are still targeted in areas that are controlled by the opposition. That is something the opposition that's saying has to stop before they enter into any negotiations. The release of detainees, for example, is another issue that is being talked about as a show of good faith by the other side. The opposition has been more or less flexible in terms of moving forward in terms of a sustainable political process. The majority of the political opposition, for example, has always made the vital distinction between the Syrian regime and the Syrian state. And so they are in opposition to the Assad regime, but they're not in opposition to the Syrian state. They are all for the sustainability and the continuation of Syrian institutions that provide services for Syrians. And so from that perspective, the opposition has always said that we can engage, we should and will engage in a sustainable political process, but a process that shows us the light at the end of the tunnel, a process that shows us that there will be real constitutional reforms, that shows us that there will be real elections, that show us that there will be a transitioning governing body that does not include the Assad dynasty in it.
So from all I'm hearing is that the opposition will go into any talk as soon as those preconditions are met and they can see the light that Assad will not be part of the transition or interim government.
That's correct, and they're not being described as preconditions, really. What the opposition is asking is that when you say that we will guarantee, when the Russians say that we will guarantee the regime to stop bombardment and stop hostilities, the opposition is saying all we need to hear is for you to fulfill that promise. And there has been, as you know, several announcements by the Russians that they will guarantee the end of hostilities, and all of these announcements of ceasefire and things of that nature have not been fulfilled. Part of the reason is because the Russians always have that loophole of saying we're bombarding an area that is controlled by extremists, which is very, very hard to determine. So at this point, what is required is maybe a neutral party that is there to evaluate and to report on what's exactly going on the ground, and to hold parties accountable to a ceasefire.
Thank you, Mr. Tabara, for joining us today in Istanbul.
My pleasure. Thank you.